So I'm going to be talking about some of the international projects that we've been doing and are continuing to do in Vietnam. And firstly, I want to start with a bit of a discussion about why we in Tasmania do international agricultural research. A bit of an overview of our engagement with Vietnam, most of the time on a previous project in south central coastal Vietnam, and then a bit of an introduction about our new project in central Vietnam. So why do we get involved in research for development projects? So research for development projects are research projects which hopefully lead to development outcomes. So they're often very applied projects. And we, and when I say we, I actually should say that I'm representing a broader group of people who are involved in this research. And we believe that it's not only the developing countries that benefit, that there's also benefits to Australia and Tasmania due to, in some cases, conducting research that has relevance to Australia, Australian agriculture, and develops methods and tools that we can apply in Australia. It definitely develops the skills and knowledge of UTAS researchers, particularly early career researchers, and gives them the opportunity to broaden their knowledge and experience. It develops international networks that helps us facilitate business in general, and it also brings fee-paying students to Australia. The projects bring money into the university and particularly postgraduate students as well. And it contributes to our image globally and helps develop friendships and networks and helps us to, I guess, fulfil some of our responsibilities as a rich country in a region which is not particularly rich. So this is a map of the provinces of Vietnam and a bit of a history of some of the projects that UTAS have been involved in. The earliest projects were forestry projects involving CSIRO and UTAS people, and I'm not entirely sure of the area, but I do know it was central Vietnam, so that may not be exactly correct. Then in 2009 actually, we began a project in south central coastal Vietnam that ran for 4 years. And a spin-off from that, we became involved in a project called the Orange Cows Project, which was a project which involved helping farmers who were victims of Agent Orange get access to livestock and learn how to run livestock. And so that was in Hue Province. We have run a Crawford-funded farmer-to-farmer training visit in Dak Lak Province. Laurie Bonney became involved in a temperate fruits project in Son La and Lai Chau provinces in northwest Vietnam, a project which was run by UQ. And following the success of our livestock project in the south central coast, we began a cattle systems project in the northwest of Vietnam. Last December we completed a scientific writing workshop funded by the Crawford Fund, which we ran in Hue, but it involved people from all over Vietnam. And just recently we started another cattle systems project in central Vietnam. So when I actually got around to sort of putting all these on the map, it was sort of more than I initially imagined, and we've had quite a few engagements with Vietnam, and they continue. Just showing a couple of pictures from some of these projects. This was the temperate fruits particularly plums project that Laurie was involved in the Northwest Highlands, and you'll often see these market stalls by the side of the road. The cattle project in northwest Vietnam, it's a challenging area. The farmers are mainly ethnic minority farmers who are not well connected to the market, and the project is about finding ways to connect them to the market, which will likely involve them collaborating more than they currently do. And yeah, as I mentioned, it involves the value chain, and this is the end, pretty much the end of the value chain where meat is being sold. And just a picture of one of some shots from forestry projects in central Vietnam as well. So moving on to what I'm going to mostly talk about, which is our project which finished a little while ago in south central coastal Vietnam, called Better Integration of Beef Cattle Production with Crop Production Systems. And I've shown this picture to a few people before because for me it tells a lot about these systems that we're working in. Firstly, they grow rice, and most of the farmers are not just cattle farmers, they're mixed crop livestock farmers who grow crops, grow livestock. There's interactions. Here's some rice straw, which is being saved to feed to livestock. There's the classic Vietnamese conical hat, which is important. Motorbikes to get around, it's important to have transport. There's cattle, and then there's an elderly woman leading the cattle on, which tells me about how labour is important in these production systems. So there's a lot in this photo. The places that we were working in south central coastal Vietnam had a number of challenges. They include the low fertility sandy soils, and the sandy soils were actually a particular focus of the project. The area is subject to high temperatures in the summer, and there's a long dry season, but there's also a very distinct wet season. The rain comes down hard and quickly, and it results in waterlogging and flooding. From a livestock production perspective, there's limited quantity of feed available and limited quality of feed as well, and that has implications for livestock production. It leads to long calving intervals because the cows aren't able to get the required nutrition so that they can get pregnant again. It leads to high calf mortality rates, and in general, low growth rates, low productivity, low efficiency, and low profitability for farmers. So this is a rice straw mound, which is plentiful in the region, but poor quality. It's glorified cardboard. Some trends in cattle production in Vietnam in general. About 95% of the beef is consumed domestically. So there's a small amount that's exported, and from central Vietnam, most of the beef is going to Ho Chi Minh City. Vietnam imports some beef, and it's particularly the high quality beef. So I've been in Vietnamese restaurants and they're offering Australian beef at high prices. But most of the farmers in south central coastal Vietnam are not getting those high prices. They're not really very well connected to the market in terms of understanding what the market wants. One of the key points here is that there is increasing demand for beef, as like many other countries in the region, as Vietnam gets richer, the increase for animal products increases. There are different types of production systems. So on one end of the scale, we have quite extensive production systems which utilise common land resources, and this might be grass at the sides of roads, like in this picture, but it might also be on the rice fields when the rice is not grown during the fallow period. And another feature of these extensive production systems are the high labour inputs. There's somebody following these cattle around, making sure that they're doing the right thing, and it's taking up a lot of somebody's time. Moving along the scale, we have what we call semi-intensive production systems. And these production systems might include some cultivated forage, such as in the trough. And the focus is generally on locally available feed products. So byproducts from the cropping systems, things like cassava powder, ground up cassava root, the leaves or the stover from the peanuts, the rice straw, cracked rice, things like that which feed into the animal production system. So often quite integrated. On the other end of the scale are more intensive production systems which are highly dependent on concentrates and in some cases commercially produced concentrates. Last time I was in Vietnam we visited an absolutely humongous concentrate factory where concentrate was being bagged and they were obviously doing a very good trade. And so this production of beef cattle with using a lot of concentrate is on the intensive end. And some of the features: high production costs, potentially higher risk. There's a lot of investment in these animals, and they're less integrated with cropping systems if we just look at it on a local level, particularly on a farm level. At the beginning of the project, we went through a process of defining what we thought success would look like for these types of farmers who we were working with. And we wanted to move farmers from being cattle keepers who only kept cattle for maybe sometimes status reasons or as a capital asset to cattle producers, farmers who are actually making money from it. We wanted to move from low cattle performance to increased cattle performance. You can read all these, but low levels of purchased inputs to maybe a different type of input, and using inputs more efficiently. We wanted to move from low income to improved income, from extensive production to semi-intensive production rather than fully intensive production, and reduce pressure on common grazing lands through this semi-intensive production system. Some of the reasons why beef cattle are a desirable thing for farmers: it enables them to diversify their income. The cattle are often less susceptible to environmental stresses as the crops, so if you can have different portfolios, I guess it's good for the farmers. Manure is very important. It's valued as a input to the cropping systems, but also it's really important for sale. We did a study. A PhD student actually did a study on the manure value chains, and it was interesting to see where this manure goes and what it's used for. Generally, it's sort of leaving the lowlands and going up to the highlands for fruit and coffee production. Cattle are also important because they're a way to utilise crop products and crop byproducts. They're important for ploughing and transport, and also capital, a way to invest their money. The overarching aim was to improve the integration of beef cattle production with crop production systems in a sustainable manner, which increases the profitability of smallholder farmers. And I'll spend a little bit of time on this because this is, I'm not going to be able to go into all the details of the research that we did and all the results, but this is sort of a summary of the approach that we used. And there's an approach that we used called it was a participatory approach, and it was a best bet research process. And so this sort of stepping up here is the process that farmers would often follow to improve their livelihoods. And it started with us understanding the system, because for many animal production systems, nutrition and feeding is really the basis of success. We started with introducing new forage species, improved forage species, being able to manage them well, managing manure, using these forage species in improved animal nutrition, improving overall cattle management. So it was sort of a step-by-step process. So we were working with small groups of farmers in each of the provinces that we worked in, and we would discuss with the farmers what we wanted to do, and the farmers would try to implement those ideas, but only the ones that they were comfortable with. We weren't forcing anybody to do anything that they didn't want to do, and we were expecting farmers not to just to adopt our ideas, but to adapt them and to apply them in a way which suited their circumstances. And so as they went through that process, we tracked them and we visited them regularly, tried to resolve any concerns that they had or any problems, and then we monitored certain aspects of what they were doing, in particular the socio-economic outcomes. So because we knew that the effects on labour were likely to be important, we made sure that we tracked that. So this was really the key to what we were doing, but we also had other applied research that was going on concurrently, and this research, I've tried to line these different types of research that we were doing up with or underneath what part of the best bet process that it applied to. So, for example, we were doing cattle feeding experiments, which helped us better understand cattle nutrition, and we were doing modelling of these animal nutrition based on locally available feed products. So I hope this gives an overview of our approach, and because I'm really going to focus on this process and not so much all of these individual research processes, because I really don't have time to go into all of those in detail. So hopefully I've given you enough about the approach that we use, and I want to jump into some of the results from those best bet activities and some of the impacts. One of the things that happened very quickly was an increase in the area and the production of high quality forages for cattle. And particularly once the farmers sort of caught the vision that they were growing a crop, but it was a crop to feed to their animals. And once the farmers got the idea of managing these forages like a crop rather than just a patch of grass, then they really did a good job in growing excellent quality forages. Another outcome was improved recommendations for cattle nutrition. One of the things that happened, which we wanted to happen, but happened on its own, was the spread of the grasses and the legumes that we introduced to other farmers, and we have done some tracking of this and to try to sort of locate all the farmers who we call scale-out farmers, so the farmers who are applying the things that we've been doing with our best bet farmers. And actually our new project will be putting a bit of effort into tracking these scale-out farmers and finding what information has accompanied this scale-out. We had limited control over who our best bet farmers were. We made a list of the characteristics that we wanted in our farmers, but we didn't always get farmers who were perfect. You know, we wanted to get representative farmers, but in some cases we had a few challenging farmers to work with. But this is an example of one of the applications. So this shows that by October 12, 95% of the best bet farmers were using improved forages, and 90% of the farmers had expanded their improved forages beyond the range that we had initially planted. So in other words, they'd done it off their own bat, and they'd done it because they thought it was a good idea. This was one of the key impacts. I'm sorry this doesn't go a little bit further. We have got some more data now, but one of the key impacts that we noticed was an average 50% reduction in the amount of labour spent in particularly supplying cut and carry forage. And there are other similar graphs to this, but so in this commune, Fuxin, it was not a great place for feeding animals, and the farmers in particular in this location were spending a lot of time trying to feed their animals. So, you know, this is 10 hours per household per day feeding cattle, and by July 12 they were down to 2 hours per household per day. So a really big reduction in amount of labour spent cut and carry forage. So how did they spend this extra time that they gained? All sorts of things. In some cases they grew their crops better, they kept their animal houses cleaner, they looked after different types of livestock, they did off-farm work, they helped their kids with their school studies, they did more housework, they looked after grandparents, and in some cases, you know, actually this isn't very clear, but this actually means cut and carry of planted grasses. So they were spending their time looking after cultivated grasses. Here are some examples of some of the stories that farmers told us that how they benefited through this process. So this is one farmer. I used to graze cattle 6 kilometres far from home because the grass in the backyard was not enough for 5 cattle. In the afternoon, my wife also had to cut native grass along the dam and rice field, which required 3 or 4 hours per day. Now I have 500 metres squared of forage in my backyard. Next year I will expand 400 metres squared of forage nearby my maize farm. My wife can save 2 hours from cut and carry, and I can save 3 hours from grazing. So some very practical and very practical outcomes for farmers. This increase in available labour can also result in improved income. So this is the farmer who said this. Since I've had more forage available in my backyard, I no longer have to spend time cutting native grass. I use my saved time for expanding 700 metres squared of green bean and chilli, of which 30% of the crop product will be for home consumption, and the rest will be sold, and I can get nearly 1 million Vietnam dong per crop. And we worked out that was about 15% of his income, or crop income. Another one, and this is the daughter of one of the farmers, and a teenage daughter. She said, when my mother had to take the cattle grazing, I had to cook the lunch. For this reason, I sometimes went to school late and spent a part of my learning time on cooking meals. But now my mother can cook meals for my family because she no longer needs to take the cattle grazing, and I can spend my time learning. So there was some really interesting social impacts from the research, and I'd like to say we didn't think that this would happen. You know, this was an unexpected outcome, but it wasn't really. You know, it was something that we hoped would happen, and we made sure right from the start that we put in the monitoring processes so that we could track it, and made sure that we were measuring these things on a regular basis through interviews with the farmers. I guess that in particular we could get that right at the end, you know, through having a dialogue with the farmers. But if we want to get the quantitative data, that's when it's really important to track it through the whole project. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we worked with farmers and with extension people. This here is Dr. Ba, who's one of our chief collaborators in Vietnam, and this is on the property of one of the farmers who was very successful, and all these people here are extension people of some sort, working for various organisations. And we found that there were strong impacts from being able to get extension people onto farms. It sounds silly, but get extension people onto farms and see what farmers were having success with, rather than basing their extension on what they've read in a book or what somebody has told them that they should be telling farmers. We also worked with individual farmers. So this was one of our best bet farmers and his wife. And, you know, when I say farmers, in this part of Vietnam at least, there are divisions between male and female farmers, but they're both very involved. In other parts of Vietnam, I've seen where the men don't work so hard, but in this part of Vietnam, the men work very hard and the women work very hard. So anyway, we would meet with individual farmers and try to help them understand things that maybe they didn't quite understand. We held a lot of workshops, and this is just an example of one of the workshops, which was it was a workshop for a cattle supplementing demonstration. So it was a demonstration on how to use supplements to finish cattle off for the market for a short period. And so they were learning how to mix things and weigh the right levels of ingredients and so on. And the farmers were very happy with the results at the end with their, you know, significantly heavier cattle. We produced a fair bit of extension material, so various leaflets, information sheets. We produced a couple of videos which were shown on national television, and one of them I think has had about 50,000 hits on YouTube. So it's it's had a few people looking at it, and so this one here was on new forages for Vietnam, and this one here was how to use supplements for feeding cattle in Vietnam. And farmer-to-farmer learning was a very important part of the project. Through the Crawford Fund, we organised for 45 farmers plus a group of extension and development officers to, I think, about 75 people in total to visit Duck Luck, which was a province up in the Highlands which had benefited from previous projects where the farmers were doing really well. They were where we wanted our farmers to be. So we took our farmers to visit their farmers, and there was a notable difference within a very short time. they could see that it wasn't just us talking about it, what their farms could be like. They saw other farmers doing it. And Dr. Kung, who's about this high, and he's a real dynamo who works in this province in Duckluck, talks about this house as the house that beef built. And this farmer has been very successful in growing forages to feed cattle and being able to make good money from it. We also tried to bring farmers to experimental sites, which were normally on farms. So we didn't really do on-station, or very little on-station research. Most of the traditional research that we did was on farm. Capacity building was also an important part of the project in a number of ways. Capacity building, particularly for the field team. So this was a workshop that we ran for a group of farmers, and I was trying to explain the difference between good quality grass and bad quality grass, and how the good quality grass has more leaf and so on. And for Tuan, who was one of the key people in the project, his capacity to do things like this, conduct workshops, and just his understanding of agricultural science just really increased in the project. Capacity building for farmers. I mean, I've probably implicitly talked about this already, but in this photo, Mr. Sin, who was one of our really, really good farmers who just went ahead and was an example to everybody else, he's explaining to government workers and extension people about what's going on. He's explaining to them all the different forages and which ones are best, and so it's an interesting case of the farmers teaching the extension people. And there were a lot more people there than just that. So yeah, capacity building for farmers was really important, and we noticed a big impact. It was also important in terms of students. Through this project and the project in Northwest Vietnam, we will have 4 John Allwright Fellows, which are a postgraduate scholarship funded by ACR. We also had 3 John Dillon Fellows, which are fellowships to visit Australia for sort of mid-career researchers. We had 2 people work on AAD or AVID volunteer positions, so they spent 9 to 11 months in Vietnam working on our project. We had a student from the US. We had, well, more now, but at least 4 master's students from Hue University work on the project, and 5 honours students, and a couple of honours students from UTAS as well. I mentioned the people who came on the John Dillon Fellowship. So Peter was was in charge of their program here, and we did some fun stuff while they were visiting Tasmania, as well as some very educational stuff as well. And we have a memorandum of understanding between UTAS and Hue University, which we're trying to develop more projects through. There were opportunities for students. So this is Josh Scandrett, who's an ex-ag science student from UTAS. Again, working with one of the farmers on a forage trial. We had, I don't know if you remember, anybody remembers Russell, but Russell was quite a large fellow, and this was pretty funny for most of the Vietnamese, because we were weighing cattle and they wanted to get Russell on the scales and see how much he weighed. And yeah, he weighed about twice as much as any of the Vietnamese people there. So, and also Vietnamese students have been involved in the project. And also within our undergraduate teaching, a number of students have been involved in projects that were related to our Vietnam project. So moving quickly on to the new project, we just had the inception meeting and for our new project, and although we still don't have great gender equality there, we have more women working in the new project than we had in the previous project. And I'm looking forward to it. We have a really good bunch of people to work with. I think this this slide sort of summarises what the new project is about. And there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. It's about growing good quality feed, to feed to animals, to harvest meat which feeds people. But there's another way of looking at this as well, which represents our objectives in the new project, which are to grow better quality feed, to better understand the nutritional requirements of livestock, particularly cows, and whereas in the previous project we were focusing quite a bit on growing animals and finishing animals, we're really going to be focusing more on cows and the cow-calf system. And another aspect of our new project will be understanding the value chain and linking farmers who are becoming good producers with the market, so that their efforts may be more rewarded because they're growing livestock which better meet the specifications of the market. And then the other important aspect of our new project will be people. We have one of the objectives will be looking at knowledge pathways and how the farmers that we will be working with, what are the best mechanisms for transferring knowledge? How do they best learn? So these are the objectives that I've just been sort of trying to talk through. Developing more efficient smallholder cow-calf and cattle growing systems through improved feed and management. Developing stronger integration with markets for beef cattle producers in central Vietnam who already have a production orientation. And thirdly, to identify and develop knowledge exchange and adoption pathways for expanding impacts within smallholder beef cattle enterprises. So just to finish off, I've listed some of our Vietnamese partners who we're working with, and there are a range of universities, a couple of universities, 3 different national institutes, national research institutes, and when I say departments of agriculture and rural development, that's at different levels. So at the provincial level, and then at a district level, we're working with those organisations, and then even down at the commune level, which is a smaller level, we're working with extension people as well. And also want to recognise the other people who have in the past worked on these projects, particularly the Central Vietnam beef cattle projects, and recognise that it's been a lot of work from a lot of people. So that's my presentation. Any questions?